We have found it in another part of Peloponnese, here in the south, in Epidaurus. But it is named after the Corinthians. And again, the Ionic capital, it was very much used in Athens. Ionia is where Izmir and Kusadasi and Ephesus is nowadays, in present-day Turkey. So it doesn't mean that necessarily that the column matches the city exclusively.
So Doric is from a tribe.
Doric is the Dorians were the Spartans, for example. The statues that you see around you, they were all found here in the archaeological site. So again, we're talking about a local museum. The excavations began in late 19th century, and it is the Greek Ministry of Culture with the American School of Archaeology excavating here. Before we see the statues and explain why they are headless, I'd like to show you these two fragments that are very, very important for the Christians and in order to comprehend the biblical past of Corinth. Over there, you see, we have 6.5 letters. Gamma, the W is the omega. Gamma, H, Gogi, it's the synagogue.
E-O-G-U.
Yes, and E-B, epsilon, beta, beta, and there is a half P, your Latin P is the Greek R, Ebre, Evreon. Synagogue Evreon. This is what this inscription says. Synagogue of the Hebrews.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So we have this fragment, and we have this one down here, which is, you can see the menorahs. And those are the archaeological proof that when the scriptures were talking about the Jewish community here in Corinth, they were indeed right. It's one more thing that enhances the credibility of the scriptures. For sure, there was a Jewish community, and because we have those two, however, those were used as a second-hand material in other structures of later periods of time, and we cannot associate the location where those fragments were found with the possible location of a synagogue during the Roman days. Because in the later centuries, it was very common to use material of older buildings, maybe abandoned, not functioning anymore. Instead of going to the quarry, those pieces were already elaborate, polished, and ready. So we do know that there used to be a Jewish community with a synagogue, Synagogue Evreon, but we cannot know the location so far. We have no other hint for that, but that's a very clear proof of their presence whatsoever. Synagogue Evreon, Synagogue of the Hebrews, and the menorahs down here. Now, regarding the statues that you see at the opposite side, most of them are Roman. If someone is not familiar with thoroughly with the Greek and the Roman art, they seem quite similar. However, the Greek statues, not because I'm Greek, they are a little bit finer. They're cast. The finesse, they're slimmer. And the foldings, the drapes of the textile, the clothes is different. And there's always head and body. It's one piece, one stone. The Romans, it was very common for the Roman sculptors to create the body and maybe match 2, 3, or even 4 heads on that same body. The big difference is that the Greek art is idealistic. It shows people how they should be, because as theater was a means to teach ethics and right behaviors, right social behaviors, then art was a way to teach aesthetics, what was considered ideally beautiful, whereas the Romans showed people how they were in reality. So they are the ones who introduced portrait at a massive scale, at a much bigger scale. And it has to do with the social background of the two societies. The Greeks, first of all, they form city-states. So the physical limits of their cities are very narrow, very small. And we have a personal relation with the authorities. We select them, we elect them, we participate in the assembly, so we know who they are, how they look like. And there are the art, as we've said, is a means to teach ideal behaviors and ideal standards. Whereas the Roman society is mostly an empire. And geographically, it's huge. It's from Spain to present-day Turkey, it's Egypt, Tunisia, Greece, the Balkans. So how can I here in Corinth, in Athens, know how my emperor 1,000 kilometers away looks like? I'll have to see his face on public art. So on the statues that embellish the agoras, the forums, the public buildings, the public streets, I'm going to see his face minted on the coins. And it is the Roman society is an more, at least, individualistic society, as all empires are. So the focus is on the emperor, the consul, those individual authorities that are in command. It's not bodies of people and assemblies that that follow a legislation somehow and in a democratic system, as in Athens. So the social background, the political background, and geographical background is different. That's why art has to serve different purposes. So in art, we see that the sculpture creates the body of a consul, of a princess, of a general, of a senator, of the emperor, and whenever that person changes, they simply switch heads. So it's very common to have 3 and 4 heads matching one statue in Roman cities that we excavate. And that's why some heads, they are not beheaded necessarily, vandalized, but you see that there is a hole and a different element fits into that hole. That's the point.
Interesting.
What about the hands? Because they look like they are unattached as well.
The hands, if there are some hands, when they were floating in air, because of static reasons, they were another different element, a different block. So they were also inserted into the stone. But since the arms are the ones that are not fully attached on the body, when there is a catastrophe, fire, an earthquake, and they fall off the pedestals, because now we're used to see the statues at our height, at the eye level. But back then the statues would be in niches, on pedestals, a few meters above the ground. That's why they get destroyed and broken more easily. So whatever, you see here there's a hole in the arm, so means that this part of the arm, it was fitting into the rest of the arm. But if something falls, it breaks, and since those are the elements of the body that are not fully attached on the body, they break easily, more easily. And again, we have a few examples of sarcophagus that you can see on your left.
Material these made out.
What you see around you is marble stone.
Marble. What's the difference between a sarcophagus and a hospital?
More a lavish and expensive way of burial. So many kings, as many heroes in mythology, they were cremated. So the urns, those small boxes, they are for any bone that was left, the textiles, anything that the cremated body had on him, and the ashes. Whereas the sarcophagus, in the sarcophagus, you place the dead body as it is. It's and again in the shaft tombs, it's the dead body as it is, without mummification didn't exist in Greece. It was completely prohibited to cut open a body. So we had a very thorough knowledge of the human anatomy, but that was through experience and observation. So during a battle, when you see all those wounded bodies and the dead bodies, this is how we knew what's in our body. But the mummification that the Egyptians did of cutting deliberately a body in order to get certain organs out, that would be out of question for the ancient Greeks. So we have shaft tombs, sarcophagus for burials, and urns for cremation in ancient Greece and Roman. Let's have a look at another small room, because all those body parts that you see, they have to do with the ancient Asclepion, that was the healthcare system of the ancient Greeks. So there was, as you know, in mythology there was a pagan god for everything. So there was the son of Apollo, whose name was Asclepius. We have his little statue at the back. And he was the god of healing and the god of medicine. So when we're talking about health system in ancient Greece, that's always under the auspices of religion, of the pagan religion. So there's not independent hospitals, but the temples of his serve as medical centers. And they, after a successful therapy, I can say a few things about those types of therapies. They were offering to the sanctuary whatever Asclepius had supposedly cured on their bodies. That's why you see toes, you see feet, genital organs, skulls, hands, fingers, whatever. It was cured on their body, either in clay, in stone, or in marble. And in the beginning, up to 400 BC, a priest served as a doctor at the same time. So we have one person for both duties, because they believed that the priests and the doctors, they got that skill gifted from Asclepius himself. So there were some religious therapies, we can say. One was to consume the meat of the sacrificed animals to the god, because they believed that that meat, when you sacrifice the animal, it automatically transubstantiates into the god you worship. So by consuming that meat, you consume his healing energy. And the second was what we call incubation, based on hypnosis. We do not know, however, yet how that hypnosis was achieved. We don't have any record of them being given an herb or something that causes hallucinations. We know that they fell asleep somehow, and they dreamt of Asclepius. At least we have the records, and they say that I dreamt of the god pulling a worm out of my belly, cutting my head in half, pulling a worm out of the head. In reality, we know that they write themselves because it was a way to advertise the sanctuaries. There were inscriptions everywhere with those successful therapies and experiences of the pilgrims. We know that they themselves say that when they wake up, they see blood on the ground. And we have found chirurgy tools. We have found metal tools. So we strongly believe that there was some kind of operation taking place. And that's why we have the blood and we have the actual objects, the chirurgical objects. That happened until Hippocrates' day. Hippocrates, you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath, is a priest himself. However, he realizes that there is logic connecting the cure and the disease and the cure. Because up until that time, they believed that you're feeling ill because you've done something bad. So that's a punishment. That's the pagan gods, the mythical gods had this double identity. They could cause you harm and cure you at the same time. And he, for the first time in history, that's why we call him the first physician, he systematically studies the symptoms. Certain symptoms lead to certain diseases, and those require a certain treatment, a therapy. So we have 70 books attributed to Hippocrates. We can verify that 13 are indeed his work, written by him. Properties of medicinal properties of the olive oil, of different herbs and plants and flowers. And he opened the way, and then we have Dioscorides, Galen in Roman Pergamum in 2nd century AD, who are real doctors, and they advance even more scientifically what medicine is. That doesn't mean that the temples of Asclepius closed, but there is a clear distinction from Hippocrates onwards that the priests will deal with the religious stuff and the doctors will deal with the medical stuff. It's not one person for both responsibilities. Corinth was a big city for the standards of its days, especially during the Roman days. Some even estimate a population here in the whole province of 300,000 people when Paul is here. So there was a big Asclepion in order to serve this territory as well. And this is what we have found. Some examples of those religious offerings to the sanctuary / hospital that give us an idea of how healthcare system functioned back then. So when Paul was here, of course he was aware of that. There was a big Asclepion. There would be pilgrims exclusively arriving for that hospital, temple hospital. I believe you can, and some other scholars, I also believe that when he writes in 1 Corinthians 12 about the body and the parts of the body, that he may be somehow influenced by this situation around him. Because it's now you see a separate element, but he says that you cannot cut off a part of a body and have the body functioning at its fullest. So it may be inspired by this. So let's continue now to for the humans. So I'm waiting for you here at the shade, next to the columns.
He's alive, but
Hippocrates is around 400 BC. The ancient city of Corinth experiences two big periods, the Greek and the Roman period, and there is a gap in between the two. So we have Corinth in the top three, let's say, city-states, Athens, Sparta, and Corinth in 6th, 5th, and 4th century BC. And we can make a rough comparison saying that Athens was the city of democracy, of philosophy, of intellectual people. The Spartans were the military people. They were the strict people, the ones living in a very laconic and minimalistic way. And the Corinthians had that reputation of being, I wouldn't say the party people, but they were wealthier. They had an easygoing life. They looser ethics as well. That's why there was a verb, Corinthiazin. It means behave as a Corinthian, and it wasn't a compliment. Corinthiazin means wander around the streets doing nothing, enjoying life, having fun, because this is what the other Greeks thought on the Corinthian lifestyle. And a Roman historian said that wrote once that not all people can sail to Corinth. It was a very expensive place. The standards of living were also very high and expensive, so not all ordinary people can be in Corinth because it was the expenses were very high. Some people compare it like Las Vegas nowadays in a very exaggerated form. So Corinth, apart from this bad reputation that has in the ancient days, was a city that introduced the trireme, which was the vessel, the commercial and the military vessel that all Greeks adopted, and with that vessel we ruled the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean with our fleet. The Corinthian ceramics, the Corinthian perfumed oils, the agricultural products of Corinth were a very famous back then. So Athens may took the lead in 5th century BC, but Corinth had already done that a century earlier. It's just that after the Persian Wars and Athens, because of its democracy, got a big boost and became the protagonist city-state. Corinth had already evolved a century earlier than Athens. One of the first cities to mint coin, to mint a coinage as well in 6th century. So I believe it's a misunderstanding to criticize the Corinthians that harshly. But indeed, they had this reputation of being people that enjoyed life. They liked luxury. They liked this looser mentality and lifestyle. The Corinthians resisted a lot when the Romans started conquering the Greek city-states. And they didn't make it in the end, the Corinthians. That's why when they were conquered by the Romans around 140 BC, the Romans annihilated the city, literally. They destroyed everything but the temples. That's why we have the Temple of Apollo here, and that's why we have the sanctuary of Aphrodite was also preserved up on top. Apart from those two monuments and a fountain here, the rest of the archaeological site is Roman. So the Romans destroy the city completely. The Corinthians flee away in order to escape, and the place is completely abandoned for a century until Julius Caesar revives the city as a Roman colony. Corinth becomes the capital city of the province of Achaia, of South Greece practically, and he brings lots of Roman veterans in order to repopulate the city, and he also brings back the descendants of those Corinthians that had fled away a century later. So we have that second bright period of the Corinthian history, which is the Roman era, starting in 44 BC until the early Christian days. When Paul arrives here, 50-51 AD, he experiences Corinth at its finest. Two ports facilitating commerce and trade on both seas, the Corinthian and the Aegean Sea. A big agora, stadiums, merchants coming and going, foreigners and locals being present. It was a cosmopolitan city and a big metropolis of its days. As I told you, maybe not as big as Ephesus or as Alexandria or as Rome, but definitely one of the top 5 cities that the empire had back then. So keep that in mind. We have the Greek period and we have the Roman period, and a century break of absolute absence here in between. What we can see from here, before we continue, first of all, that rock structure that you see is a water tank, a fountain carved in the natural rock. So it may be a man-made structure, but the material is the rock as it was found there. And you see 2 water tanks. There were 2 more, it's just that the roof has collapsed at the back. And people would take their vases and they would go to that water tank, and they would get the water and walk back home. That's 6th century BC. The Romans were much more developed, I'm sad to say, but they were in hydraulic engineering because the Greeks went where the water was. The Romans brought the water where they were, to put it simply. So you had to take your amphora and go there and get your water. In Roman days, we see that the Romans bring water with canals from an upper spring up on top of the mountain, 550 meters above sea level. We have a spring with fresh water, sweet water. So they had canalized that water down to the city, and under any public structure that you see around you and any street, they had both sewerage system and water supply systems, clay pipings. So they had the water running into their shops, into their houses. That was done in the Roman days from 1st century BC onwards. And the temple that you see here, it's a temple of Apollo. It happens to be the oldest surviving temple in Greece so far, 550 BC. It stands on that very low, that projected ground, supervising the agora on one side, and there were some commercial shops by the other side as well, where the buses are. You count 7 pillars. There were 6 at the short, 13 at the long side. And since we're talking about an early temple, 6th century BC, you see that the blocks are monolithic, single stone, single block. And that's why not many were preserved. The Corinthian Sea lies over a tectonic fault. So it may be narrow, but it's a very deep sea. And it gives several earthquakes, up to 7. We had even 8.1 at the Richter scale. And the rest of the temple practically was completely gone because of those natural catastrophes. The Romans, we know that they applied a layer of stucco onto those pillars. It contained tiny bits of glass, and it gave a marble effect on the column. Because the material itself, it's porous stone, it's very simple and not that impressive. The Romans made it more impressive by adding this layer of glass stucco on it. So from a distance, you thought it was a marble temple. And it was Apollo worshipped in here. Now, I was commenting on the single blocks because in the beginning we have single blocks as pillars, but because of the earthquakes, as architecture advances, and you'll see that at the Acropolis, they realized that by cutting the pillar in smaller drums, cylinders, it gains more stability. And there wasn't a continuous rod like a spine running through the whole column, but at every division there were holes you have those 2 blocks, so you have a hole here and a hole here, and a wooden dowel fitted in, like a Lego toy nowadays, and that absorbed the seismic shock, but allowed the column to shake. It gave the necessary elasticity to the column. But in the beginning, we're talking about single block pillars, as you see them. Let's which is the
Romantic,
love,
yeah,
the
yeah.
romantic love.
And phileo,
Philia, that's friendship.
right?
Uh,
Storge,
Storgi, that's affection.
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why I think God, God the Father sent the Son to Palestine at a certain time. Because Palestine, Africa touched, Asia touched, Europe touched, and then the Greek language was used, which was maybe the best.
So the other day, so imagine that it was again a fully paved square. It wasn't dirt as you experience it now, and some slabs here and there on the ground. This is the original marble pavement that this square would have back in the Roman days. During the Greek days, 6th, 5th, 4th century, that was the track of the stadium of Corinth. But when the city was revived as a Roman city, the layout, the urban layout, was completely altered. So the stadium was transferred to another place, and this became the central square, the agora. So what kind of functions do we have around? And we'll get to the bema seat as well. Where you were standing, where you were sitting, all that side behind me, that was a very long stoa, STOA, something like a portico. So you have a colonnade at the facade. You step into the colonnade, you're under a roof, you're at a sheltered corridor, and at the back, some stoas have, others don't have rooms. In our case, it had. So it was 40 meters wide and more than 100 meters long. It was a colossal building, somehow defining the north side of the agora. And at the ground floor, we have found many different rooms that served as restaurants, we believe, and shops, because at each room we found a well. And there was fresh water flowing, coming from the upper spring that we have on Acro Corinth. So we assume, we speculate that they would be storing meat and fish in there, something like refrigerators nowadays. And the upper level would be for temporary residence, like a hotel, an inn of those days. Don't forget that we're at a harbor city, a major harbor city, so there were several people around that were not meant to stay for long. They were here for trade purposes, for business. There were big sanctuaries around, but it was mostly trade, what would bring a foreigner here. And we'll get to that when we talk about Paul as a tent maker. So that was an area where people would spend a few moments of socialization. Stoa, it reminds you of Stoicism, the Stoic philosophers, because they used to teach at stoas in the Athenian Agora, for example. So the classroom that was the stoa, that gave its name to the philosophy. Now it has a completely different sense, a completely different meaning, but the etymology has to do with the place where those philosophical lessons were given. Behind you, where you see the arch, that was a much more elaborate stoa, portico, because we forget the rectangular form and we have these arches defining each section. So again, you have a long and narrow building, but at the facade, you have those vaulted roofs. You have those arches, and the merchant would rent one. They would pay the fee to the local authorities, and they would conduct their businesses in there. So that's a big difference with the Greeks and the Romans in that aspect. The Greeks have something like like a farmer's market nowadays, stalls and benches out in open air, whereas the Romans gather all those commercial activities under one roof, and we can say that they introduced the concept of shopping centers, shopping malls, a single building for all those commercial activities. Now the short sides. We came that way. By your right hand side, we have found several small pedestals and altars dedicated to Greek, to Roman, to Egyptian gods. Don't forget that definitely there was a Jewish synagogue. We've seen that fragment in the museum. So that part of the agora was dedicated to religious practices. And since Corinth was a very cosmopolitan and a highly visited city, all those foreigners and all those visitors would need their corresponding place of reference, of religious reference. Now, across the opposite side, the monuments we have found, they have very spacious plans. They are big and they are spacious with no corridors and divisions in them. So we're talking about rooms where an assembly takes place, gatherings of a big number of members. We have identified those as administrative buildings. So in general terms, that's the layout of the Corinthian agora. You see that the basic needs, the social needs, religious, commercial needs, they are satisfied here at the agora. And in the middle, right here in the center, we have the bema seat, which is a platform. As you can see it would be fully covered with, embellished with those white marble slabs. As you can see, we have reconstructed one sample. And the Roman authorities would stand on this platform in order to give announcements, to address their words to the public. And any trial, like the one that Paul was brought at, of big importance, that would be also publicly done. So the bema seat is a place where the Roman authorities can communicate somehow and address their word to the locals that are around. It is not a suggested bema seat, it is the bema seat. So it is, once again, I repeat, that you're physically present at the place where all those important events that you've been reading in chapter 18 of the Acts, that this one has to do with Corinth, you are at the correct place, right where all those events took place. So that's the bema seat in front of you.
Wait, can I ask, where would the accused be standing, and would the judge, that be standing up on that top level there?
Yes, how the authorities would be up high, and any other member of the trial, but not the authorities, they would be around next to the wall, and the public around attending this moment. But only the authorities would be up high. Now, I wanted to make a comment on, and then you'll have free time to take photos on the bema seat, about Paul being a tent maker. According to the scholars, it's the wisest choice he could ever make here in Corinth. Because of his Jewish background, he had to know a craft, and that was tent making. But among the many different professions that you could, let's say, practice in Corinth, this is the one that gave you most of the money, because it was a harbor city. That's one aspect. The second aspect that we will comment on is the time that he's here. Corinth was one of the 4 big places where the 4 big games were celebrated. You're more familiar with the Olympic Games. Those were held in Olympia, which was a sanctuary of Zeus, West Greece. But there were also the Pythian Games for Apollo every 4 years, and every 2 years we had the Isthmian, named after the isthmus, the canal, the Isthmian Games dedicated to Poseidon. So there was a big sanctuary of Poseidon, a few kilometers from here, with stadiums, with the complexes, the training complexes and everything. When Paul is here, those games are to be celebrated. And when we excavate stadiums of ancient Greece and Roman Greece, those stadiums have an average capacity between 40 and 45,000 people. So we're talking about large numbers of attendance, and don't only calculate those in the stadium. You have to consider all those merchants arriving here, selling their little stuff as a big religious fair. All the captains bringing those people here. Any type of any kind of profession that would profit from those religious and athletic events. Being a tent maker is very important, because all those people, let's say 50,000 people, where are they going to spend the night? There's no hotels, there's no Airbnbs, so they will need a tent. So the first thing is that Paul may be working here, he's physically present here, he's manufacturing his tents here, but his customers are not necessarily Corinthians. They are non-Corinthians, non-locals, who happen to be here because of those religious festivities. And you know that when someone travels for any reason, they have open horizons. They have a more tolerant, they have a more flexible mentality. They're not narrow-minded, because inevitably they come in contact with more people. So Paul knows that he may be talking to them while both are in Corinth, but these words will later be taken and travel to the places of origin of those clients. So the discussion is done in Corinth. The elaboration later on will be done elsewhere. So he has the chance and the big privilege to come in contact with people that are not locals. So we have the Isthmian Games, and then we have the economy of Corinth that relies on maritime trade. So again, until nowadays, captains and sailors, they are people that have experienced the world. So again, those captains, they're going to need sails for their ships, and they will need textiles for their supplies. Where will they get those? From Paul, Aquila, and Priscilla, some of the tent makers. That's why I told you there couldn't have been any wiser choice than that, being a tent maker in Corinth at that specific period of time, because it's the economy that is that requires tent makers. You have all those ships coming and going, and you also have the Isthmian Games. And in particular, exceptionally, you're going to have this big number of pilgrims arriving, and they're going to need a place to stay. There is a project from Stanford University. It's called Orbis, O-R-B-I-S, and it calculates the duration and the financial costs of travel in Roman Empire. So you can put, let's say, origin Philippi, destination Thessalonica, 49 AD, 1st century AD, and it will give you the approximate amount of money necessary to take you from Philippi to Thessalonica. So Paul, it was important to make a living and make a good living, because he may have received some monetary help, like from the Philippians later, but he had to self-sustain. his travel from place to place, his movement, his moving from place to place. So it's a good example, this Orbis. It's a good project. So in order for you to understand how expensive that travel was, and it was more than necessary for Paul to work in order to sustain and be self-sufficient in this case. Orbis from Stanford University, travel in Roman Empire. So that's the comment. That's my comment. In order to understand better, you read it. He worked as a tent maker, but why? Why? It's the Roman economy that defines that. It's the religious exceptional circumstances of that specific year that define that. That's why he's a tent maker in Corinth. It has to do with the background. So before we continue to the exit that way, a few minutes for you to go up to the Bema seat for photos, and then we continue. Strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. Indeed, the wreath given to the athletes was olive in Olympia. Here it was a pine tree. It was laurel tree. But after a few days, they don't last. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. So remember when we were in theater of Philippi, and we talked how aware he was of Greek theater, so he uses many words that come from the theatrical art. Now you see how aware he is of sports and athletics and all those religious athletics that the Greeks organized, and he uses metaphors and terms coming from this aspect of Greek culture in order to deliver his own new message. So he uses the word crown, disqualified, race, runners, things and concepts that the Greeks were very familiar with. They knew what he was talking about when he was talking of a crown, of a wreath. So again, you see how he hits the core with a few words. It's just the right words because he knows the audience that he's speaking at or writing at. It's in 1 Corinthians. Now we will walk down this paved street. It was a pedestrian walk, actually. We do not have any trails for vehicles, for wheels back then. It was 4.5 miles long and went all the way to the coast where the port of Lechion, the West Harbor, was. So the ships arriving at that port, they would unload their cargo, and slowly the merchants, the pilgrims, everyone would walk on that street in order to arrive at the agora, like an avenue. It was a pedestrian avenue of the ancient city and the Roman city. The pavement that you see is original. So we will walk on it. So it's the authentic material.
Was that Greek or
Roman?
We're having lunch at the
Yes, the original down to the paved pedestrian walk. And you can see all those workshops on your left. The white columns on your right, that was a courtyard. and then you would access the Temple of Apollo by that side. A little bit further down, there are public restrooms too, Roman public restrooms, the latrines.
Really good analogy about the Philippi and the competition for the races here. That's very
Okay.
done this before.
And that's a pedestrian cross where I stand, this projected sidewalk. This is a pedestrian cross. We also have it in Pompeii. So when there was rain falling and maybe the street was flooding, still someone could cross the street on those blocks. It's a pedestrian, a zebra cross, like. Yeah, these are all stores on your left, like a marketplace. The toilets are here to the right.
Yeah, remember those?
And we'll see in Ephesus some of there is a much bigger complex.
Oh, bigger restaurant.
Yeah.
It was not private at all.
All those, yes, they are workshops for shops, commercial.
Shops. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do they have water at these public toilets you mentioned?
Yes, we had, because we would canalize the water from the top of the hill,
Yeah.
and we would bring it there. And you see, it's literally public, so it's not individual closets as now. So the slaves would flush, they would throw water with their buckets, and they would mop away whatever had to be mopped. And that would enter this public sewerage system.
Interesting.
And it's also, apart from that, it's interesting to see how deep the excavations have gone, because see where 21st century is nowadays. We have to go up the steps, see where the other buildings are. Yeah. Of course, there are ruins underneath the village. Nobody doubts about that. And it's also interesting when you arrive at the exit, you'll see that there is a modern street right opposite. So the plan of the village of ancient Corinth follows the road system of the Roman Corinth. So memory was kept, and the streets nowadays follow the layout of the street, the road network that existed back then.
I got you.
The name means right behind you. Is that AIGLI?
Too bad we don't have a view.
Oh, wow.
It's better on this side.
Later. I hear what you had to say.
She told me that.
Never got along with Warren's like it. Warren's all the way through their peaceful, not the last
Big sailboat. Yeah, it's a catamaran too. I think that's all right. Yeah.
I am not whipping post to it. I just brought these babies.